At my parents' anniversary, my dad called my career filthy and cut me out of the family fortune. Then asked me for $220,000 when my sister wrecked the family business. I just said, "The filthy one doesn't fund you." Hi, my name is Natalie Carter. I am 32 years old, living and working in Boston. From the outside, many people might think I have a life worth envying. I run a pet spa chain called Paw Haven, which now has 6 branches across the city and surrounding areas, providing stable jobs for dozens of employees. Every morning, I step into my sunlit little office, where lush green plants sit by the window and my small dog, Luna, lies lazily on the cushion beneath my desk. I drive to work in a new SUV, and my private apartment is in a quiet neighborhood near the Charles River, with warm, tidy interiors and every comfort I could need. Everything I have has come from my own 2 hands, from sweat, tears, and countless sleepless nights when I first began building my career. Yet behind all the bright lights of that success, I've always been seen by the very people who gave me life as the lost child. In the eyes of my parents and my family, I was never worthy, never their pride. They called the work I chose dirty because I spent my youth caring for animals, for the dogs and cats they believed were lowly creatures. At family meals, I often felt like an outsider, shut out of conversations about stocks, real estate, or the glittering achievements of my sister Sophia. I could bring home fresh bouquets and boxes of pastries from famous bakeries, send birthday cards and well wishes. Yet in their eyes I remained a lonely shadow, unfit to stand inside the value system the Carter family had built. I once believed that my hard work and success would make them see me differently, that one day my parents would smile with pride at their daughter for becoming independent, building something of her own, and being loved by her customers. But the truth was far harsher. What I had built, they treated as if it did not exist, or worse, as if it were an insult. I remember my father once openly saying in front of relatives that my dirty job only dragged down the family's reputation, that I was staining generations of Carter business tradition. Each of those words felt like a blade to my chest, but I clenched my teeth and endured, holding on to the fragile hope that one day they would change. But everything shattered exactly 1 year ago, at my parents' wedding anniversary celebration. Their 30th anniversary was held at an upscale restaurant in the heart of New York. I can still recall the extravagant atmosphere of that night, the dazzling glow of crystal chandeliers, tables covered in pristine white cloths, neat rows of champagne glasses reflecting the sparkling light. Relatives from near and far gathered in full, even those I had not seen in years were present. Shimmering evening gowns, expensive suits, the sharp rhythm of high heels clicking against marble floors, and a jazz band playing familiar tunes from the corner of the room filled the air. Everyone seemed cheerful, toasting and laughing, as if this were the perfect moment to display the wealth and unity of the Carter family. I sat quietly at the edge of a table, a glass of water before me, trying to blend into an atmosphere I had long known I never truly belonged to. I had prepared for this day weeks in advance. Knowing how much my parents cherished their old memories, I had commissioned a painting recreated from their wedding photo taken 30 years ago. The artist I found was an Italian master known for his emotionally rich portraits, and I believed his work would soften my parents' hearts. I wanted that gift to be a bridge, a quiet message that I was still part of this family, that I still longed for reconciliation, that I still hoped for the day my parents would look at me without reproach. The painting was carefully wrapped and placed beneath the table, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The atmosphere inside the restaurant felt no different from a grand gala. Champagne glasses were constantly being refilled, waves of laughter rippled through the space. People discussed stocks, the real estate market, lavish vacations, and prestigious schools for their children. From time to time, a few relatives would stop by my table, nod politely, remark that I looked well, and then quickly move on. No one asked about my work. No one showed the slightest curiosity about Paw Haven, the pet spa chain I had poured my entire youth into building. They looked at me with half an eye, as if my presence was an off-key note in the glamorous symphony of the evening. When the jazz band's music faded, my father Charles Carter rose to his feet. He wore a dark gray suit with a burgundy tie, his face carrying the familiar stern expression. Holding a glass of champagne, his voice boomed steady and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? Tonight is not only the celebration of 30 years of marriage with my wife, but also the moment for us to announce an important decision." The room fell silent, whispers died, and every gaze turned toward him. I saw my mother sitting at his side, her face glowing with pride, eyes shimmering as if on the verge of tears. Then my father spoke again. "The entire Carter family fortune, our companies, properties, and assets will, from this day forward, be entrusted to our youngest daughter, Sophia. She has followed the right path for this family and will continue carrying the Carter legacy into the future." All thunderous applause erupted immediately after. Cheers, congratulations, and words of praise for Sophia rose like a chorus. I went completely numb. My body felt frozen, my heartbeat slowed, and my hands clenched so tightly that my nails left marks in my skin. Beneath the table, the wedding portrait I had brought seemed to grow 100 times heavier. I no longer had the strength to present it. In that moment, I saw clearly that I was nothing more than an afterthought at my own family's celebration. I stood up, my voice trembling but firm. "What about me? I'm your daughter too." The room fell into a brief hush, a few surprised eyes turning toward me as if they had only just remembered I was there. My mother looked at me, the smile still on her lips but her tone icy. "You already have a career, a house, a car. Sophia has nothing yet. We need to take care of her." Her words cut deeper into the wound inside me. I couldn't hold back anymore, my voice rose. "Everything Sophia has is because you gave it to her, her tuition at Wharton, her own apartment in Manhattan, a new car, everything handed over. And me? I've had to fend for myself since I was 18, studying and working at the same time, earning every dollar, building everything step by step. What I have today wasn't handed to me by anyone, it came from my own two hands. And now you're telling me she has nothing while I have too much?" Sophia, my younger sister, cut in then, her voice dripping with contempt. "You only have a few little pet shops, don't compare yourself to me. I'm carrying the company while you're busy taking care of cats and dogs." Her words made me spring to my feet, eyes blazing. "Shut your mouth. You have no right to speak here." The air around the table grew taut like a stretched string, whispers rising in the background. Heat surged through my face, and before I could say another word, my father slammed his hand down on the table. The thunderous sound silenced everyone. He glared at me, his voice sharp and biting with each word. "If you hadn't chosen that filthy line of work, the company would have been yours tonight. You have no one to blame but yourself." I let out a bitter laugh, the taste of it burning in my throat. Meeting his eyes, I spoke with a calm but cutting tone. "That filthy job saved your company $80,000 last year. If you despise it so much, then give me the money back." The room sank into silence. The whispers vanished, leaving only the trembling notes of the jazz band in the corner. No one spoke another word. Eyes darted away, uneasy and awkward, as they followed me pushing my chair back. I bent down, lifted the painting still inside its gift box, held it tightly against my chest, and walked away with my head held high. I left the restaurant that night, my steps heavy on the brightly lit streets of New York. The sound of car horns, the chatter of passers-by, the neon lights from billboards flashing into my eyes, all of it blurred together as if I were walking through a shattered dream. I clutched the painting tightly in my arms, never having felt it weigh so much. The cold wind cut against my skin, but its sting was nothing compared to the icy emptiness tearing through my chest. I walked faster, desperate to leave behind the laughter, the applause, and the words of congratulations that I knew would never be meant for me. On the drive back to Boston, childhood memories flooded in like a tidal wave, each fragment surfacing so vividly it made my throat tighten. When I was little, Sophia and I were treated almost the same. I remember clearly how our birthdays, just days apart, were celebrated with two identical cakes, the only difference being the color of the candles. When we wanted bicycles, they bought us matching ones, just in different shades. Pink for me, green for Sophia. Even when punished, we faced it together. I recall one time when we both scribbled on the living room wall, and our mother made us kneel and scrub every pencil mark clean with our own hands neither of us spared. I grew up believing the Carters valued fairness, that my parents would always keep things balanced between us. I believed love could not be measured or compared, that fairness was an unshakable principle in our family. That belief lasted until I turned 18. It was an autumn afternoon, and I sat in the living room holding a stack of papers from Cornell where I had been accepted into the veterinary program with a partial scholarship. I was eager to share the news with my father, thinking he would be proud, that he would encourage me to chase my dream. But the moment I spoke, his face darkened. He crossed his arms, leaned back in his chair, and his eyes turned cold. "I won't spend a single cent on that filthy profession. If you want to study it, you'll have to figure it out yourself." With just one simple, final sentence, he crushed the heart of my 18-year-old self. I stood frozen, stunned, as if drenched in a bucket of ice water. In that moment, I realized that the path I had chosen was not only despised but had pushed me completely outside the orbit they had mapped for me. While I struggled to cover tuition, working night shifts at an animal clinic and surviving on instant noodles just to save every dollar, Sophia lived an entirely different life. My parents covered her full tuition at Wharton, one of the most prestigious business schools in America. She had her own apartment in Manhattan, a brand new car I wouldn't even dare to dream of. Whatever Sophia wanted, she only had to ask. For me, every tuition payment, every textbook, every meal was paid for with sweat and tears. The so-called fairness in the Carter family, I realized, only existed when it didn't clash with the image they wanted to project. Sophia was the embodiment of their dream, graduating from a top business school, inheriting the company, carrying on the tradition. And me, with my dream of becoming a veterinarian, I was nothing more than a thorn in their side, a source of shame they wished to bury. I once believed that parents loved their children unconditionally, that as long as I worked hard I would be recognized. But the older I grew, the clearer it became that their love came with conditions. I had to follow the path they chose, live in service of the family's image, and become their pride in the way they dictated. The years that followed my father's cold refusal to support my veterinary dream were the harshest of my life, but they also shaped me into the person I am today. I rented a small, shabby dorm room near Cornell, its four walls stained, the window creaking with every gust of wind. Even after the partial scholarship, tuition was still a crushing burden, and to survive, I had to work constantly. By day, I attended classes. By night, I rushed to an animal clinic on the outskirts of town, doing everything from cleaning kennels and bathing cats and dogs to recording medical charts. On endless overnight shifts, I often collapsed over the desk at 3 in the morning, the smell of disinfectant clinging to my clothes. The pay was barely enough, but I was patient, saving every dollar, skipping student parties, even forgoing breakfast just to buy the textbooks I needed. I remember the winter days when snow blanketed the entire campus and my worn-out shoes left my feet numb with cold. In my hands was a lunchbox I had prepared the night before: rice, a boiled egg, and a few vegetables. Many nights, as I crawled under a thin blanket, I longed for a hot meal, longed to return home to my parents' embrace. But instead, all I had were brief, distant messages from my mother, things like, "Focus on your studies, don't cause trouble," or, "Sophia scored very high this week." Every time I read those words, I swallowed my tears and reminded myself to stay strong. I had no right to collapse, because if I gave in, all the effort I had poured in up to that point would mean nothing. Through persistence, I eventually graduated. The day I held that diploma in my hands, I cried. Not out of simple happiness, but because I knew I had accomplished something that once felt impossible. Enduring a grueling journey without a shred of support from my family. After graduation, I continued working at a small veterinary clinic. But then, one quiet Sunday afternoon, an unexpected idea came to me. Why not share pet care knowledge online? I propped my phone on a stack of books, used the dim glow of an old desk lamp, and recorded a short video about how to recognize the signs of stomach illness in dogs. I expected nothing, thinking that if just a few people watched, perhaps they might find it useful. But within just 2 days, that video had reached hundreds of thousands of views. After a week, the number had surpassed 1 million. I was stunned, unable to believe my eyes. My inbox overflowed with messages of gratitude, questions from viewers everywhere. They called me the cute pet doctor and begged me to post more videos. I began creating more clips: how to bathe a cat, trim a dog's nails, share nutritional tips. Each video received enthusiastic responses. Then came the email from YouTube notifying me that monetization had been enabled. In the very first month, I earned over $2,000, an amount equal to several months of my previous salary combined. I knew I had found my path. With income from my YouTube channel, along with a small bank loan, I opened my first store, a small pet spa in Boston. On opening day, only a few dozen customers showed up, but gradually, thanks to dedication and love for animals, Paw Haven became a familiar place for the city's pet-loving community. A year later, I opened a second branch, then a third. After 5 years, the number had grown to 6. I hired more staff, trained them like family. I wasn't just creating jobs, I was building a community, a place where pets were loved and owners felt at ease leaving them in our care. Success gradually came, but strangely, in my family's eyes, everything I did still held no value. At gatherings, my parents spoke only of Sophia, about the financial projects she was involved in, the big contracts she was handling. As for me, they ignored me, only occasionally making an offhand remark like, "Natalie is still looking after cats and dogs." They spoke as if my work were nothing more than a meaningless hobby. But instead of reacting, I chose silence. I understood that their recognition was a luxury, and I did not need it to keep going. Even while being belittled, I kept my habit of sending my mother flowers on Mother's Day, of mailing birthday cards to my father. Every year, I chose a bouquet of pure white roses, writing a few simple lines of congratulations. I didn't expect them to be moved or to thank me. I saw it as the last duty of a daughter. Sometimes I wondered why I still did it, when they had never truly cared about me. Perhaps it was because I didn't want to become a bitter version of them. I wanted to believe that by holding on to kindness, I could keep moving forward without turning into someone cold-blooded. A year before that anniversary party, I received a phone call in the middle of the night, a call whose every breath and drawn-out pause I can still remember. The clock was nearing 2 in the morning. I had just finished drafting a report for Paw Haven's next branch opening and was about to lie down when my phone rang. On the screen, my father's name appeared, Charles Carter. My heart sank instantly. He had never called me at that hour unless something truly serious had happened. I hesitated for a few seconds, but then picked up. On the other end came his hoarse, weary voice. "Natalie, Carter & Co. is in big trouble. A major contract just fell through. The client pulled out at the last minute. If we can't raise $80,000 within a week, we'll lose even more deals, and the family's reputation will be ruined." I sat up straight, trying to steady myself, my heart pounding hard in my chest. Before I could respond, he continued, his voice dropping as if to soothe me. "You know, Sophia is still young, she can't shoulder this yet. Only you have the ability to save the company right now. After all, you'll still have a share in it later. This is family business. We have to protect the legacy together." I bit my lip, silent for a few seconds. A surge of questions rose inside me. Since when did the company see me as part of the family? Since when had my dirty work become the lifeline? But his voice trembled, each word heavy like a plea. And above all, I still carried inside me something hard to shake, the yearning of a daughter who desperately wanted her father's recognition. I didn't ask for details, I didn't bargain. I simply let out a quiet sigh and said, "All right, I'll help." The next morning, I sat in my small Paw Haven office, the computer screen glowing with my online banking page. The account showed the sum I had painstakingly built over years. As my cursor hovered over the transfer button, it felt as if I were tearing off a part of myself. But I did it. I transferred the entire $80,000 into Carter & Co.'s account. Moments later, my father called back, his voice noticeably lighter. "You did the right thing. I knew I could count on you." I didn't say much, just a quiet yes before hanging up. All that day, my heart felt heavy but laced with a flicker of hope. I thought perhaps from now on my father would see me differently, perhaps my efforts would finally be acknowledged. I told no one, not my friends, not my employees. Deep down, I regarded it as a daughter's duty, a sacrifice known only to my father and me. I told myself that keeping it secret was good. Sometimes the noblest acts are the ones kept in silence. But I was wrong. A year later, at the anniversary party, when my father stood in the middle of the room and solemnly announced he was handing over all the assets, the company, and the properties to Sophia, every last shred of belief inside me crumbled. I sat there, numb, recalling that winter night when he had pleaded with me, remembering his trembling voice and his firm promise. "One day you'll have a share in the company. This is family business." In the end, it had all been a pretext, a sweet-sounding lure to draw money from the daughter they had already erased from their lineage. As the hall erupted in applause for Sophia, an icy chill settled over me. That $80,000 was just a small number to them. But to me, it was sweat, youth, nights of exhaustion, a piece of trust I had foolishly placed in the word family. In that moment, I understood that no promise from my parents held any value anymore, and the recognition I had once longed for was nothing but an illusion. On the way out of that party, I no longer felt regret, only a strange emptiness. I realized that the so-called daughter's duty I had clung to all this time had always been one-sided. I had paid with money, with trust, while they treated it all as nothing more than their due. From that moment on, a lesson burned into me. There are some debts of blood that you should never repay, because once you do, you are left with nothing but bitterness. After that bitter anniversary night, I returned to Boston with an entirely different state of mind. Whatever ties had once bound me to the Carter family seemed cut away, leaving a hollow space but also opening a new path. I threw myself into my work at Paw Haven, treating it as my true home. Every morning, I walked into the first branch, past the small padded chairs for customers and their pets, greeting each employee, stroking a few dogs waiting for their baths. Their trusting eyes sparkled, and my heart softened. If my parents scorned this work, then I would prove to them and to myself that love for animals could build a lasting empire, no less than any business they so admired. I began planning my expansion. From one small shop, I poured every bit of profit I had saved into renting new spaces, first in Cambridge, then Somerville, and gradually moving deeper into the heart of Boston. Each branch became a milestone marking my resilience. Most of my employees were young people who loved animals but lacked opportunities. I trained them, paid them fairly, and treated them like family. Every time a new branch opened, my pride wasn't just about the revenue. It was knowing I had created stable jobs for dozens of people. That, to me, meant more than any praise from the Carter family ever could. Along that journey, I was fortunate to meet a mentor, Mr. Michael, a retired owner of a chain of veterinary stores. He looked at me, saw my passion, and also recognized the hurt hidden behind my eyes. One afternoon, sitting together in a small cafe, he said something I've never forgotten. "Natalie, don't showcase your success, not even to your parents. People can turn it into shared pride, but your parents, they'll only turn you into a walking wallet. You don't owe them any proof anymore." I sat there silent because his words struck the deepest wound inside me. I had once craved their recognition so badly that I'd foolishly handed over $80,000 only to receive an empty promise in return. This time, I swore I would never let myself make that mistake again. So I chose silence. For 6 months after that fateful party, I didn't call, didn't text, didn't send a single signal toward my family. I knew with certainty they wouldn't reach out either, because in their eyes I no longer had any value. At first, that silence left me unsteady, like someone just freed from a toxic relationship but still conditioned to expect scolding. Some nights I would jolt awake, my hand reaching for my phone as if waiting for a message from my mother. But the screen stayed dark, and in that moment I understood there was no one on the other end, and there didn't need to be. Strangely, as time passed, I felt lighter. Mornings without checking my mother's messages only to swallow tears, evenings without the pressure of finding a good enough gift for my father, all of it brought me a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in years, I could sit alone by my apartment window, sip a late-night coffee, listen to the low hum of jazz, and not feel guilty for not calling home. I realized that silence, too, could be a kind of peace. That distance gave me the chance to see myself more clearly. I saw a Natalie no longer haunted by the need to prove her worth to her parents. I saw a woman who understood that true value does not lie in someone else's recognition, but in what she builds every single day. Paw Haven was not just a business, it was proof of the strength and determination I had forged over the years. More importantly, it was the family I chose, a place where people respected one another, shared joy, and no one was ever called the lost child. Lona. 6 months without contact with my blood family taught me that sometimes distance is not a loss, but a cure. I felt freer than I ever had, and perhaps, for the first time in my life, I was truly breathing in the air of peace. One early autumn morning, as the sunlight was still faint and mist hung over the trees outside my window, my phone rang. I was preparing for a meeting with Paw Haven's management team, still holding a hot cup of coffee, when the screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Dad. The sight of it made my heart pause. I hesitated for a few seconds, ready to decline, but curiosity won. I wanted to know why he was calling this time. I'm listening. My voice was short, flat, without emotion. On the other end, my father's voice came fast, laced with fatigue and irritation. Natalie, Carter & Co. is in serious trouble. Sophia signed the wrong contract and exposed a damaging clause. As a result, we're now facing a $220,000 loss. If we don't cover it immediately, the company could collapse. I closed my eyes and drew in a deep breath. The story sounded all too familiar, only the number had changed. Last time it was 80,000, this time nearly 3 times more. I let him speak a few more lines before cutting in, my voice calm but icy. Return the 80,000 to me first, then we can talk. Before he could respond, I ended the call. The coffee in my hand was still steaming, but my heart had turned cold. I knew with certainty this would not be the last time. And I was right. The very next morning, the doorbell rang insistently while I was feeding Luna. I walked out and was hardly surprised to see my father, mother, and Sophia standing on the porch. My father wore a suit, but his tie was askew, frustration etched across his face. My mother's eyes were red, her hands tightly clasped as if in prayer. And Sophia, my sister, who had always worn arrogance like a crown for the first time, looked unsettled, her lips trembling with unease. I didn't open the door wide. I stood firmly in the threshold, my voice calm but cold. If the 3 of you are here to ask for $220,000, turn around and leave right now. I spoke loudly enough for all of them to hear clearly, but kept my tone measured, as if I were simply making a factual announcement. My mother stepped forward, her voice breaking, her eyes glistening. Natalie, you have an entire chain of pet spas, a steady income. 220,000 isn't such a big number for you. Please, just this once, help the family one more time. Her voice trembled, but I could see it wasn't only tears, it was also the same emotional pressure they had always used against me my whole life. Sophia chimed in, her voice shaky. I know I was wrong. I signed the contract carelessly, I put the company in danger. Please, just this once, help me. I'll change. It was the first time I had ever heard Sophia admit fault, but her words rang hollow. She never apologized for the way she once sneered at my work, never apologized for standing beside my parents at that party, basking in all the glory while I was cast aside. I looked at the 3 of them, feeling an eerie emptiness inside. No more tears, no more trembling. Only a clear boundary I would never allow anyone to cross. Leave, I said slowly, each word heavy as stone. If not, I will call the police. The air grew thick. My father stood in the back, his face flushed red, fists clenched tight. I knew he wanted to shout, to lash out as he had at so many gatherings. But this time, I was no longer the daughter who bowed her head in fear. I stood tall, my eyes unwavering, my hand resting lightly on the doorframe as if to press the point that this was my territory and they had no right to step inside. My mother broke down, tears streaming, but I did not waver. Sophia lowered her head, lips pressed hard together, not daring to say another word. I repeated myself, louder now, each syllable crisp and final. Go, I have nothing left to give you. A few long seconds stretched into eternity, then finally my mother turned, tugging Sophia's hand. My father growled something under his breath, but stepped back as well. I shut the door firmly, the sharp sound echoing through the apartment like the final period at the end of a sentence. Leaning against it, I drew a deep breath. In that moment, I didn't feel the old pain, only relief. For the first time, I truly understood the strength that comes with setting boundaries. I turned back to Luna, the little dog still patiently waiting for her breakfast. She looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes, her tail wagging. I knelt to stroke her fur and whispered softly, "From now on, you're the only family I have." And I believed it this time. I would never waver again. Just as I predicted, only a day after I firmly refused, Sophia struck back. That morning, as I arrived at the Paw Haven branch in Cambridge, a young employee rushed into my office, hands trembling as she held out her phone. "Natalie, you need to see this." On the screen was a long Facebook post signed Sophia Carter, already shared thousands of times within hours. In it, my sister painted me as a cold-blooded villain who had abandoned her family in their time of need. While our company teeters on the brink of collapse, my parents begged for help, yet my sister, the one with a multi-million-dollar pet spa chain, drove us away from her door and threatened to call the police. She once received support from our family, but now treats us like strangers. I read every word, feeling the blood rush to my head. Sophia's post was a distortion of truth, even embellished, enough to make anyone who didn't know the real story believe I was ungrateful, heartless, and cruel. I opened Instagram and Reddit. Sophia had reposted it there too. The comments were flooded with criticism. Greedy to the core. Got money and forgot her roots. Shameful to abandon your parents in a crisis. Within just a single day, the consequences became clear. Calls poured in from customers canceling their pet care appointments. Paw Haven's fan page was flooded with one-star reviews. My employees looked confused and worried about their jobs, several pulling me aside to ask, "Natalie, is it true? Are we going to be okay?" I looked into their young faces, people who had trusted me, who had stood by me in building Paw Haven, and I felt a surge of fury. It wasn't just my personal reputation under attack, it was the blood, sweat, and tears of dozens of innocent people now hanging in the balance. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at my computer screen filled with hundreds of negative comments. I remembered my parents' faces at my doorstep, my mother's trembling voice, Sophia's quivering words. It had all been nothing but theater. When they couldn't squeeze money out of me directly, they resorted to filth, smearing me publicly to force my hand. They knew I valued my reputation, knew Paw Haven was the greatest achievement of my life, so they tried to destroy it. I wasn't going to let that happen. The very next morning, I called an old friend, Brian Miller, the lawyer who had helped me with the lease for my very first store. We met at his office, a bright space with glass walls overlooking the city center. I sat down, recounted everything, and handed him printed copies of Sophia's posts, screenshots of the negative reviews, records of canceled appointments, and the revenue losses. Brian listened silently, fingers laced together, his gaze fixed. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, a half-smile forming on his lips. "Congratulations, Natalie. You're holding a near-guaranteed civil lawsuit. Everything Sophia has done, public defamation, damage to your brand, loss of revenue, forms a solid legal basis. With this evidence, not only can you reclaim your reputation, but you could also receive compensation worth many times the losses." I froze for a moment. Never had I imagined the day would come when I would take my own sister to court. But then I remembered the worried faces of my employees, the erased appointments, the customers who turned away. I knew I had no choice. This was no longer just a private matter between Sophia and me. This was justice. This was my responsibility to the people who believed in me. Brian looked at me, his voice firm. Natalie, you've endured enough. It's time to hold them accountable. You don't need to feel guilty. You're not destroying the family, they already did that themselves. I nodded, my heart pounding but my eyes steady. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I had prepared. Copies of financial losses, a list of canceled appointments, correspondence with clients. I placed it on the table and said, I'm giving you full authority. I want to sue Sophia in court. Brian extended his hand, and I took it. The handshake was firm, cold, decisive, a milestone. I could feel that a new chapter was about to begin, not with tears or pleading, but with the law. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly. In my dreams, I saw myself standing in court, no longer the daughter my parents had called the lost child, but a woman who knew how to protect herself. And I swore, this time, I would not back down. On the morning of the trial, the Manhattan sky was heavy and gray, the clouds drifting slowly as if awaiting a verdict of their own. I arrived at the courthouse early, dressed in a simple yet strong navy suit, holding the meticulously prepared file Brian had compiled. My heart beat steadily, each thump strong and clear, but strangely, I no longer felt nervous or afraid. Instead, there was a profound calm, as if I had finally reached the end of a long road, and all that remained was to place the final period. The Manhattan courtroom was vast, its high ceiling and tall glass windows letting in a muted, gray light. As I walked in, I saw Sophia already seated on the opposite side with her attorney. My sister no longer carried her usual arrogance, her head was bowed, her hair falling across part of her face, hiding her eyes. Beside her were my parents Charles and Margaret, but this time, they weren't in the audience rows looking proud as they had at so many lavish parties. They looked worn, silent, their eyes red and weary. I glanced at them briefly, then turned away. They were no longer my family, only strangers sitting beside the defendant. Brian sat beside me, his eyes bright with confidence. He placed a steady hand on the thick stack of documents and gave a small nod. Let the truth speak, Natalie. You don't need to say much, the evidence will defend you. His words made me feel steadier than I had ever been. The trial began, a heavy air settling over the room. Sophia's lawyer was the first to rise, attempting to argue that her posts were nothing more than a personal outpouring of emotion in a moment of confusion. That she had never intended to harm my business. He insisted that the public misunderstood and that Sophia was only seeking sympathy. I sat in silence, watching, anger simmering inside me. Those lies were identical to the tactics my family had always used, denying responsibility, blaming circumstances, never once admitting fault. Then it was Brian's turn. He stood tall, his voice strong and resonant with every word. Your Honor, we have clear evidence that the defendant's public posts caused direct and severe harm to the plaintiff. This was not personal emotion, this was deliberate defamation. One by one, he presented the documents, printed pages of hundreds of negative comments, financial records showing a 35% revenue drop within a week of the posts, a $50,000 contract canceled by a partner, and over 120 pet spa appointments erased. With each piece of evidence laid out, the weight on my chest lifted a little more. Then Brian pointed to the projection screen, where side-by-side images showed the contrast before and after Sophia's posts, rows of one-star reviews, filled with words like traitor, greedy. He turned back to the judge. Your Honor, this is not the public's misunderstanding. This is the inevitable result of false information the defendant intentionally spread. I looked over at Sophia. My sister sat frozen, her hands clenched tightly, her lips trembling. I saw no remorse in her, only fear. Her lawyer tried to interject, insisting that Natalie already owns a large chain of stores, the losses are insignificant. But the judge immediately cut him off. Every business has the right to protect its reputation. A single dollar lost due to falsehoods is still unacceptable. After nearly 3 hours of arguments, the courtroom fell silent as the judge lifted the verdict. His voice rang out, slow but piercing. The Manhattan Court declares the defendant, Sophia Carter, civilly liable for defamation and financial damages caused to the plaintiff, Natalie Carter. The defendant is ordered to pay direct compensation totaling $240,000. The air froze for a moment. I heard Brian's breath release, as though a massive stone had been lifted from his chest. Sophia buried her face in the table, my mother covered her mouth as sobs broke out, and my father sat motionless, his eyes blank with disbelief. But I didn't linger. I stood, gathered my documents, and walked out of the courtroom with quiet composure. I never looked back. In the hallway, daylight streamed through the tall windows, spilling across the cold marble floor. I drew in a deep breath. This wasn't a victory to flaunt, nor a cheap act of revenge. This was justice, a final boundary I was forced to draw to protect myself and those who had placed their trust in me. As I left the courthouse, it felt as though I had closed a long, bitter chapter. No more tears, no more fragile hopes that they might change. I had chosen my own path, and this time there was no space left for betrayal or lies. In the months following the trial, my life slowly returned to its rhythm. Paw Haven's revenue recovered, customers returned day by day, and my staff found their smiles again after the stressful period. I thought everything had finally ended until one late winter morning, the doorbell rang again. This time it wasn't the angry, insistent ringing I remembered, but long, hesitant chimes. I opened the door and saw my mother standing there. She had grown thinner, her eyes red and shadowed, her trembling hands gripping her handbag straps as if clinging to the last thing keeping her upright. Her voice was hoarse, weak. "Natalie, your father. He's in the hospital. This time it's really serious. The doctors say the treatment will cost $50,000. I know we were wrong before, but please, just this once, help your father." I stood still. A part of me wanted to break down, to run and hold her, to forget everything and be a dutiful daughter again. But another part, the one scarred by years of wounds, felt only a strange emptiness. I no longer felt anger or pain. It was as if I had crossed a threshold of emotion, a place where those pleas no longer had any power over me. I asked quietly, "You still have the house in Long Island, don't you?" My mother flinched slightly, then gave a faint nod. I continued, "That house is worth at least $500,000. Sell it. And don't come to me again." With that, I closed the door before she could respond. My back pressed against the cold wood, but inside I felt no tremor. No more tears, no more sobs, no more guilt. I only felt that I had finally broken free. After that day, I realized I no longer belonged to the Carter family. But strangely, I no longer felt lacking. Because I had found another family, a family of choice, one I built for myself. It was the group of friends who co-founded Paw Haven with me, the ones who stood by my side through the early struggles when the first store was just a tiny shop with a few old tables. They didn't share my blood, but they shared every drop of sweat, every dream. It was also the pet-loving community in Boston, the customers who treated me like family, bringing their dogs and cats, and then sitting for hours to talk, trusting us with their care. And most importantly, it was the small family in my own apartment, my boyfriend, Daniel, an architect who loved old books and classical music, and my little dog Luna, always wagging her tail to welcome me home. With them, I was never the lost child. I was Natalie, a friend, a colleague, a woman who was loved and respected. Late at night after work, Daniel and I would walk Luna along the park by the Charles River, talking about the future, about distant trips, about a small home filled with light and laughter. Those simple moments showed me one clear truth. Family should never be a shackle, it should be a place where you can be yourself. One spring evening, sitting alone in my Paw Haven office, I opened an old gift box and took out the wedding portrait I had once prepared for that fateful party. For the first time in months, I hung it on the wall, right next to my desk. I didn't hang it out of regret or longing. I hung it as a reminder to myself that family, if it becomes pressure or contempt, loses all meaning. That painting was now a symbol of a lesson that I had once been cast aside, called worthless, but I had stood up and built a life of my own stronger than anything they could imagine. I looked at the painting and spoke aloud, as if sending a message not just to myself but to anyone hearing my story. Family is not the place you are born into, it is the place where you are respected and loved. And if someone calls your work dirty, remember, the only thing truly filthy is their contempt and selfishness. As I switched off the lights and stepped out of the office, I felt a sense of lightness. The past had closed. I no longer needed my parents' recognition, nor did I have to prove anything to Sophia. I had a family of my own, a family I chose where love and respect were values never compared or bargained away. And that was the greatest victory of my life. If you are listening to this story and find pieces of yourself within it, I want to tell you one thing: you are not alone. Sometimes, the very people we expect to love and protect us are the first to deny, belittle, or even exploit us. But you do not need to live to please them. Your worth does not come from your blood family's recognition, but from what you build with your own hands, and from the people who choose to stand beside you when everyone else turns away. Remember, setting boundaries is not selfish, and saying no is not cruel. It is how you protect yourself so you can keep growing, keep healing, and find true happiness. And one day, you will realize, you were enough from the very moment you came into this world. Thank you for listening to Natalie's story. If it touched your heart or brought back a memory of your own, give it a like and share it with your loved ones. See you in the next episodes, airing daily on Familial Stories Exposed.